It's 3 o'clock on the East Coast, noon on the West Coast. I'm Shepard Smith at the White House. This is Studio B and Fox News Channel continuing coverage of the 9/11 hearings on Capitol Hill. Richard Clarke testifying now.
Mr. Clarke, thank you for being here. I guess I shared John's feelings when I read your interviews with the staff as well, because it gave a perspective of somebody that bridged different administrations and really had a chance to see it. And of course, you were looking at it from different level than some of the other people we'd interviewed. And likewise, I was a little taken back when I saw the hoopla and the promotion for the book, and when I saw this transcript that just came forward today. But what's bothering me now is that not only did you interview with us, but you also spent more than 6 hours with the Congressional Joint Inquiry, and I've read your information, and I mean, that's a very serious body and very serious inquiry. Not that we're not, but I can't believe over 6 hours you never expressed any concern to them that the Bush administration didn't act with sufficient urgency to address these horrible potential problems, if you felt that way. And I mean, did you ever list for the Joint Inquiry any of the measures that you thought should have been taken that weren't?
I think all of the measures that I thought should have been taken were in the plan that I presented in January of 2001, and were in the NSPD that the principals approved in September 4th, 2001. There were no additional measures that I had in mind other than those that I presented. And as I did explain, both to the Commission and to the Joint Inquiry, those proposals, which ultimately were adopted by the Principals Committee, took a very, very, very long time to make it through the policy development process.
Well, I understand that, but I think the charges that you've made are much more, well, I think they're much deeper than that. Let me ask you a question, because it's been bothering me as well. You've been involved intimately in PDD 39 and in PDD 62.
I've already got through.
The latter certainly is very, very much implicates your own position. How long did it take for those to be developed and signed?
I'm not sure I could recollect that answer. Perhaps the staff could find out. Your general answer about how long does it take PDDs to be signed, I've seen them signed in a day, and I've seen them take 3 years.
Well, of course, I mean, we've all seen that, but these were, obviously, 62 was a very important one, but obviously the one that we're talking about that was developed was an extremely important one, and it was one that you put a lot into yourself. Mm-hmm. And it was in the beginning of a new administration. Anyway.
Sir, if I may.
Yeah.
There's also the issue that was raised earlier by another member of the Commission as to whether all of the pending decisions needed to be rolled up into a national security presidential directive, or whether, based on the urgency of the intelligence, some of them couldn't, like arming the Predator to attack and kill bin Laden. Why did that have to wait until the entire policy was developed? Weren't there pieces like that that could have been broken off and decided right away? And I certainly urged that. I urged that beginning in February, when I realized that this policy process was going to take forever.
Oh, no, I understand, and I understand your testimony that you did that. What I don't understand is if you had these deep feelings and deep concerns about the lack of ability and urgency within the Bush administration, that you didn't advise the Joint Inquiry. I mean, did you feel it not necessary to tell them that the Bush administration was too preoccupied with the Cold War issues or Iraq at that point?
I wasn't asked, sir. I think I provided the Joint Inquiry as a member of the administration at the time, please recall. I provided the Joint Inquiry all the facts it needed to make the conclusions which I've made about how long it took and what the development of the policy process was like, and the refusal of the administration to spin out for earlier decision things like the armed predator.
Well, it obviously will be the members of the joint inquiry to make that decision and judgment. But you must agree that it's not like going before a joint inquiry is not like going before a press background briefing. And as you said, I think your description was, I tried to highlight the positive and play down the negative. But the joint inquiry wasn't asking you to do that. They were asking you to come forward, weren't they?
I answered very fully all of the questions the joint inquiry had to ask. They said that themselves in their comments to me and in their report. I testified for 6 hours, and I testified as a member of the Bush administration. And I think, sir, with all of your experience in this city, you understand as well as I do the freedom one has to speak critical of an administration when one is a member of that administration.
I do understand that, but I also understand, the integrity with which you have to take your job. But thank you, sir.
Thank you. We're starting on a second round now of questioning. Congressman Roma.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Having served on the joint inquiry, the only person of this 9/11 panel to have served on the inquiry, I can say in open session to some of Mr. Fielding's inquiries that as the joint inquiry asked for information on the National Security Council, and we requested that the National Security Advisor, Dr. Rice, come before the joint inquiry and answer those questions, she refused. And she didn't come. She didn't come before the 9/11 Commission. And when we asked for some questions to be answered, Mr. Hadley answered those questions in a written form. So I think part of the answer might be that we didn't have access to the January 25th memo. We didn't have access to the September 4th memo. We didn't have access to many of the documents and the emails. We're not only talking about Mr. Clarke being before the 9/11 Commission for more than 15 hours, but I think in talking to the staff, we have hundreds of documents and emails that we didn't previously have, which hopefully informs us to ask Mr. Clarke and ask Dr. Rice the tough questions. And I have some more tough questions for you, Mr. Clarke. On the FBI, you've said that the FBI did not do a very good job. I think I'm paraphrasing you in much easier language than you've used, but that during the millennium, which may be the exception to the rule, they performed extremely well in sharing information. How do we get the FBI to do this on a regular basis? We still have problems here today. Or is that not an option for us? We don't have time, Mr. Clarke. I mean, I appreciate everybody going after everybody in Washington, D.C. We don't have time to make these kinds of arguments and attacks if we're going to get this situation right in the future in this country and prevent, or hopefully prevent, the next one when we do know something for certain. And that is that groups like Al-Qaeda want to get dirty bombs, they want to get chemical and biological weapons, and they want to come after America. So how do we get this situation solved, Mr. Clarke? What do we do with the FBI? What's your recommendation?
In a perfect world, I believe we could create a domestic intelligence service that would have sufficient oversight that it would not infringe on our civil liberties. In a perfect world, I would create that domestic intelligence service separately from the FBI. In the world in which we live, I think that would be a difficult step to go directly to. And so what I proposed instead is that we create a domestic intelligence service within the FBI, and as fast as we could, develop it into an autonomous agency. I'm very fearful that such an agency would have potential to infringe on our civil liberties. And therefore, I think we would have to take extraordinary steps to have active oversight of such an agency. And we'd have to explain to the American people in a very compelling way why they needed a domestic intelligence service, because I think most Americans would be fearful of a secret police in the United States. But frankly, the FBI culture, the FBI organization, the FBI personnel are not the best we could do in this country for a domestic intelligence service.
We will certainly be looking to people in future hearings for their recommendations in a host of different areas. So I hope that you might think through this area a little bit more and be available to us. Mr. Clarke, let me ask you some difficult questions for you to get at the complexity of our relationship with the Saudis. On the one hand, I think it's fairly, there's a great deal of unanimity that the Saudis were not doing everything they could before 9/11 to help us in a host of different areas, that 15 of the 19 hijackers came from there, that we had trouble tracking some of the financing for terrorist operations, that we still have too many of the madrasas and the teachings of hatred of Christians and Jews and others coming out of some of these madrasas. We need to broaden and deepen this relationship. I will ask you a Part A and a Part B. Part A is, where do we go in this difficult relationship? And Part B is to further look at the difficulty here. You made a decision after 9/11 to, I think, and I'd like to ask you more about this, to allow a plane of Saudis to fly out of the country. And when most other planes were grounded, this plane flew from the United States back to Saudi Arabia. I'd like to know why you made that decision, who was on this plane, and if the FBI ever had the opportunity to interview those people.
You're absolutely right that the Saudi Arabian government did not cooperate with us significantly in the fight against terrorism prior to 9/11. Indeed, it didn't really cooperate until after bombs blew up in Riyadh. Now, as to this controversy about the Saudi evacuation aircraft, let me tell you everything I know, which is that in the days following 9/11, whether it was on 9/12 or 9/15, I can't tell you, we were in a constant crisis management meeting that had started the morning of 9/11 and ran for days on end. We were making lots of decisions, but we were coordinating them with all the agencies through the video teleconference procedure. Someone, and I wish I could tell you who, but I don't know who, someone brought to that group a proposal that we authorize a request from the Saudi embassy. The Saudi embassy had apparently said that they feared for the lives of Saudi citizens because they thought there would be retribution against Saudis in the United States as it became obvious to Americans that this attack was essentially done by Saudis. And that there were even Saudi citizens in the United States who were part of the bin Laden family, which is a very large family, very large family. The Saudi embassy therefore asked for these people to be evacuated. The same sort of thing that we do all the time in similar crises, evacuating Americans. The request came to me and I refused to approve it. I suggested that it be routed to the FBI and that the FBI look at the names of the individuals who are going to be on the passenger manifest and that they approve it or not. I spoke with at that time, the number 2 person in the FBI, Dale Watson, and asked him to deal with this issue. The FBI then approved, after some period of time, and I can't tell you how long, approved the flight. Now, what degree of review the FBI did of those names, I cannot tell you. How many people there are on the plane, I cannot tell you. But I have asked since, were there any individuals on that flight that in retrospect the FBI wishes they could have interviewed in this country? And the answer I've been given is no. That there was no one who left on that flight who the FBI now wants to interview.
Despite the fact that we don't know if Dale Watson interviewed them in the first place.
I don't think they were ever interviewed in this country.
Do we know, so they were not interviewed here. We have all their names. We don't know if there has been any follow-up to interview those people that were here and flown out of the country.
The last time I asked that question, I was informed that the FBI still had no desire to interview any of these people.
Would you have a desire to interview some of these people that asked?
I don't know who they are.
We don't know who they are.
I don't know who they are. The FBI knew who they were because they had...
Given your confidence in your statements on the FBI, what's your level of comfort with this?
Well, I will tell you in particular about the ones that get the most attention here in the press, and they are members of the bin Laden family.
Okay.
I was aware for some time that there were members of the bin Laden family living in the United States. And let's see, in open session, I can say that I was very well aware of the members of the bin Laden family and what they were doing in the United States. And the FBI was extraordinarily well aware of what they were doing in the United States. And I was informed by the FBI that none of the members of the bin Laden family, this large clan, were doing anything in this country that was illegal or that raised their suspicions. And I believe the FBI had very good information and good sources of information about what the members of the bin Laden family were doing.
I've been very impressed with your memory sitting through all these interviews that the 9/11 Commission has conducted with you. I press you again to try to recall how this request originated. Who might have passed this on to you at the White House Situation Room, or who might have originated that request for the United States government to fly out? How many people on this plane?
I don't know.
We don't know how many people were on a plane that flew out of this country. Who gave the final approval then to say, yes, you're clear to go, it's all right with the United States government to go to Saudi Arabia?
I believe after the FBI came back and said it was all right with them, we ran it through the decision process for all of these decisions that we were making in those hours, which was the Interagency Crisis Management Group on the video conference. I was making or coordinating a lot of decisions on 9/11 and in the days immediately after. And I would love to be able to tell you who did it, who brought this proposal to me, but I don't know. The two, since you press me, the two possibilities that are most likely are either the Department of State or the White House Chief of Staff's office. But I don't know.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Senator Gotton?
One more question on that subject. When the approvals were finally made and when the flight left, was the flight embargo still in effect, or were we flying, or was that over? Were we flying once again?
No, sir. No, Senator. The reason that a decision was needed was because the flight embargo, the grounding, was still in effect.
Okay. We talked a little bit in my earlier round of questioning about this frustrating phrase, actionable intelligence. And one of your recommendations to the new administration, according to our staff report, was to choose a standard of evidence for attributing responsibility for the coal and deciding on a response. Did that express a frustration that you had for the previous several years, that the phrase actionable intelligence often seemed to be an excuse for people not doing anything, that perhaps they had other reasons for not wanting to do? Did you want a broader definition, either of how much intelligence what needed or how broad action should be?
Yes.
Yes to both?
Yes to both.
Okay. Could you tell me, what your previous frustrations had been and what kind of test you would have imposed?
Well, I think if you go back to 1993, when the attempted assassination on the first President Bush occurred in Kuwait, the process we put in place then was to ask the FBI, working with Secret Service, to develop a set of evidence, and CIA to develop separately an intelligence case. And that took from February of '93 through the end of May. And it was done in a way that was reminiscent of a criminal process. At least the FBI case was. The CIA case was an intelligence case and had different sources of information, different standards for what was admissible, and a more lenient standard for making a determination. But I think beginning then, I was frustrated by that kind of evidentiary process. Now, I heard Sandy Berger this morning point out that immediately following the Pan Am 103 terrorist attack, the assumption in the intelligence and law enforcement communities was that it was a Syrian attack. And I recall that. He's quite right. And it turned out not to be a Syrian attack. He pointed out that in the days and weeks after the TWA 800 crash, we assumed it was a terrorist attack. There were eyewitnesses of what appeared to be a missile attack. But after exhaustive investigations that went on for years in the case of the NTSB and the FBI, a determination was made that it was not a terrorist attack. And I believe that that is the accurate determination. Mr. Berger made other examples, Oklahoma City and whatnot. I think we have to distinguish between rushing to judgment after a terrorist event, which, as Mr. Berger said, is a mistake, because sometimes the evidence changes, sometimes the evidence develops. We saw this in Spain just 2 weeks ago, where for the first day after the attacks in Madrid, the evidence really looked like it was the Basque separatist group. And I know there are political charges against the Spanish government for having distorted intelligence, but there was a lot of intelligence the first day that suggested it was the Basque terrorist group. So we do need to be careful not to rush to judgment after a terrorist attack. On the other hand, what I was suggesting in that paper that you referred to, is that we not necessarily have to wait for a terrorist attack in order to attack a terrorist group. But when you sometimes do that, you get into trouble. President Clinton got into a lot of trouble, a lot of criticism, for blowing up a chemical plant in Sudan. To this day, there are a lot of people who believe that it was not related to a terrorist group, not related to chemical weapons. They're wrong, by the way. But the president had decided in PDD 39 that there should be a low threshold of evidence when it comes to the possibility of terrorists getting their hands on chemical weapons. And he acted on that basis, and when he acted on that basis, he and his advisors were all heavily criticized. So what I was suggesting there, and what I am suggesting here now, is that while Sandy Berger is right, and we should not rush to judgment after a terrorist attack as to who did it until there is ample intelligence evidence, not criminal evidence. On the other hand, we should feel free to attack terrorist groups without waiting for them to attack us if we make a policy and an intelligence judgment that they pose a threat.
One follow-up question on that. Between January and September of 2001, was there any actionable intelligence under either the narrow or broader definition that caused you to recommend an immediate military response to some provocation?
I suggested, beginning in January of 2001, that the Cole case was still out there, and that by now, in January of 2001, CIA had finally gotten around to saying it was an al-Qaeda attack, and that therefore there was an open issue which should be decided about whether or not the Bush administration should retaliate for the Cole attack. Unfortunately, there was no interest, no acceptance of that proposition, and I was told on a couple of occasions, well, that happened on the Clinton administration's watch. I didn't think it made any difference. I thought the Bush administration, now that it had the CIA saying it was al-Qaeda, should have responded.
But there was no other January to September incident that caused you to recommend a military response, I gather.
In the general definition, I think there was. What we had discussed in the general definition was not waiting for the terrorist attack, but feeling free to use military activity or covert action activity, it doesn't have to be military, covert action activity as a way of taking the offensive against terrorist organizations that look like they threaten the United States. And what our plan or strategy or list of options included was covert action activity to be taken to go on the offensive against al-Qaeda in Afghanistan. Through
Surrogates or through direct intervention?
That was a combination of both, but it was the determination of how that would be structured would be left to the CIA.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Senator Kerry.
Well, Mr. Clarke, let me say at the beginning that everything that you've said today and done has not damaged my view of your integrity. It's very much intact as far as I'm concerned, and I hope that your pledge earlier not to be a part of the Kerry administration did not preclude you from coming to New York sometime and teaching at the New School. So,
in the Kerry administration.
And let me also say this document of Fox News earlier, this transcript that they have, this is a background briefing. And all of us that have provided background briefings for the press before should beware. I mean, Fox should say occasionally fair and balanced after putting something like this out, because they violated a serious trust. All of us that come into this kind of an environment and provide background briefings for the press, I think will always have this as a reminder that sometimes it isn't going to happen, that it's background. Sometimes, if it suits their interest, they're going to go back, pull the tape, convert it into transcript, and send it out in the public arena and try to embarrass us or discredit us. So I object to what they've done, and I think it's an unfortunate thing they did. Let me say as well that you and I have some disagreements, and I'm going to get into them. First of all, I do not want to go back to the bad old days when covert operations could be done in an environment where the people thought they could do something in violation of U.S. law, or that they come to Congress and lie about it, thinking that that was okay. I mean, that's what we were directing our attention to. Perhaps there were some personnel mistakes that were made in the response to the problems in Guatemala in particular. But I don't want to go back to the bad old days where guys could go out there and operate and not have to worry about U.S. law and not have to worry about whether or not they came and lied to Congress.
No, nor do I, Senator.
And secondly, I don't see it as you do that the war in Iraq has increased the threat of terrorism. I honestly don't, unless you say that the threat of terrorism in Iraq has unquestionably gone up as a consequence of al-Qaeda feeling even more opposition to freedom in Iraq than they do in freedom in the United States. They feel much more threatened by having an Arab democracy than they do by having a democracy in the United States. And so I don't see it that way. And though I don't go as far as the administration has done with drawing the connection to al-Qaeda, I do think that the presence of Abdul-Rahman Yassim in Iraq certainly causes some suspicions to be raised. And I wonder, and I presume you know who Abdul-Rahman Yassim is, and I wonder if you could comment on that. I mean, what conclusions do you draw by the fact that we have an individual who we believe was a part of the conspiracy to attack the World Trade Center in the beginning, the World Trade Center 1 in February of 1993, an associate of Ramzi Youssef, who was connected at least indirectly to the second attack, I wonder what conclusions you draw from the fact that Yassim has been given, at the very least, a place that he could hang out, and he's on the lam again. And we're still hunting him and trying to find out where he is in Iraq today.
Let me go back into the history of 1993, which is when we first heard about this man. In 1993, when the truck bomb exploded at the World Trade Center, we didn't know there was an al-Qaeda. No one had ever said that. And the initial reports, and I mean initial by the sense of about a year or two, the initial reports from the FBI's investigation of that attack, suggested that the attackers were somehow a gang of people from 5 or 6 different countries who had found each other and come together, almost like a pickup basketball team, that there was no organization behind it. Eventually, in retrospect, the FBI and the CIA were able to discover that there was an organization behind it, and that organization is what we now call al-Qaeda. Most of the people involved, directly involved in that conspiracy, were identified and tracked down by the FBI and CIA and arrested or snatched and brought back to the United States. Mr. Yassin was the one who wasn't. And the reason he wasn't was he was an Iraqi. He was the only Iraqi in the group. There were Egyptians, there were other nationalities. He was an Iraqi, and therefore, when the explosion took place and he fled the United States, he went back to Iraq. And we were obviously, for obvious reasons, unable to either snatch him or get him to be extradited to the United States. But the investigation, both the CIA investigation and the FBI investigation, made it very clear in 95 and 96, as they got more information, that the Iraqi government was in no way involved in that attack. And the fact that one of the 12 people involved in the attack was Iraqi hardly seems to me as evidence that that the Iraqi government was involved in the attack. And the attack was al-Qaeda, not Iraq. The Iraqi government, because obviously of the hostility between us and them, didn't cooperate in turning him over and gave him sanctuary, as it did give sanctuary to other terrorists. But the allegation that has been made that the 1993 attack on the World Trade Center was done by the Iraqi government, I think, is absolutely without foundation.
Can you see where a reasonable person might say that if Yassim is given a safe haven inside of Iraq prior to 9/11, that the Iraqis are at least unwilling to do what is necessary to bring someone that we believe is responsible for killing Americans in 1993 to justice?
Well, the Iraqis were, absolutely, the Iraqis were providing safe haven to a variety of Palestinian terrorists as well. Absolutely. As were the Iranians, as were the Syrians.
Thank you.
Commissioner Benveniste.
I just wanted to say that having sat in on 2 days of debriefings with you, Mr. Clarke, and having seen excerpts from your book, other than questions you weren't asked, I have not perceived any substantive differences between what you have said to us and what has been quoted from your published work. Having said that, I'll cede my time to Congressman Romer if he'll give me his time with Condoleezza Rice.
That may not be a good
Submit
deal.
those questions for the record, Mr. Commissioner.
Is that all?
Chairman.
Commissioner Thompson?
Mr. Clarke, in this background briefing, as Senator Kerry has now described it for the press in August of 2002, you intended to mislead the press, did you not?
No. I think there's a very fine line that anyone who's been in the White House in any administration can tell you about. And that is When you are special assistant to the president and you're asked to explain something that is potentially embarrassing to the administration because the administration didn't do enough or didn't do it in a timely manner and is taking political heat for it, as was the case there, you have a choice. Actually, I think you have three choices. You can resign rather than do it. I chose not to do that. Second choice is...
Why was that, Mr. Clarke? You finally resigned because you were frustrated?
I was, at that time, at the request of the president, preparing a national strategy to defend America's cyberspace, something which I thought then and think now is vitally important. I thought that completing that strategy was a lot more important than whether or not I had to provide emphasis in one place or other while discussing the facts of this particular news story. The second choice one has, Governor, is whether or not to say things that are untruthful. And no one in the Bush White House asked me to say things that were untruthful, and I would not have said them in any event. The third choice that one has is to put the best face you can for the administration on the facts as they were, and that is what I did. And I think that is what most people in the White House, in any administration, do when they're asked to explain something that is embarrassing to the administration.
But you will admit that what you said in August of 2002 is inconsistent with what you say in your book.
No, I don't think it's inconsistent at all. I think, as I said in your last round of questioning, Governor, that it's really a matter here of emphasis and tone. And that it's really, I mean, what you're suggesting, perhaps, is that as Special Assistant to the President of the United States, when asked to give a press backgrounder, I should spend my time in that press backgrounder criticizing him. I think that's somewhat of an unrealistic thing to expect.
Well, what it suggests to me is that there is one standard of candor and morality for White House special assistants and another standard of candor and morality for the rest of America. I don't get that.
I don't think it's a question of morality at all. I think it's a question of politics.
Well, I'm not a Washington insider. I've never been a special assistant in the White House. I'm from the Midwest, so I think I'll leave it there.
Congressman Roma.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I appreciate your patience. This has been, I'm sure, a long day for you, Mr. Clarke. I want to explore a little bit more, since we've heard from Mr. Tenet on this issue today, the Predator issue. As you know, the Predator first came out of use in Kosovo, and it was used in various activities with a laser on it to track Serb tanks, to help us go after those tanks. It was flown in 2000 in the Clinton administration as a recon vehicle, unmanned recon vehicle. In 2001, we had a debate, a complex debate that I can understand both sides of. It took several months to try to resolve it. There are two issues here, on the recon Predator and on the armed Predator. Mr. Tenet said that they were not blocking the armed Predator. You have said that they were blocking the armed Predator. How do we reconcile these two? And please take us through a little bit of this. I want to ask you if it would have made much of a difference getting the unarmed up, and if the armed could have been put up earlier than October of 2001.
Let me begin in the first few months of the year 2000. President Clinton was enormously frustrated because he had authorized, in effect, the assassination of bin Laden and his lieutenants. by CIA. He had also authorized, in principle, the use of military forces, cruise missiles, to attack and kill bin Laden and his lieutenants. And none of this had happened because the CIA had been unable to use its human intelligence resources in Afghanistan to provide, I'm sorry, Senator, actionable intelligence. On the occasions when we had things that looked like actionable intelligence, the 3 or 4 occasions, the director of CIA himself said the intelligence wasn't good enough. So the president was very mad, and he asked Sandy Berger and me to come up with a better way. I asked the director of the Joint Staff, Admiral Fry, and the associate DCI, Charlie Allen, to form a task force to come up with a better way. They proposed flying the Predator in Afghanistan. CIA's Directorate of Operations, the director of the Directorate of Operations, opposed the use of Predator in 2000 for reconnaissance purposes. He said that if there were additional resources available to pay for the Predator operation, he would prefer to use them on human intelligence.
And how much are we talking about, Mr. Clarke?
Pennies, relatively.
Hundreds of thousands of dollars?
Some of it cost hundreds of thousands. The whole program was in the low millions, I think. In any event, this slowed things down, obviously. Mr. Berger took up my cause with the Director of Central Intelligence and got their agreement that they would fly the reconnaissance version. It was flown in September and October of 2000, 11 flights. And the Directorate of Operations put a lot of restrictions on those flights, in part because they were afraid that the aircraft would be shot down and they would have to pay for it. I tried to point out that even if the aircraft were shot down, the pilot would return safely to home. But that didn't seem to persuade them. In any event, during those flights, at CIA's insistence, they were designed as a proof of concept operation, meaning that we could not have cruise missiles, other military activity, other covert action capabilities cued to this, so that when the Predator did see bin Laden, as it did, I think, on 3 occasions, but clearly on 1 in that time frame, there were no military assets available. There were no covert action assets available at the insistence of the CIA, because they wanted this only as a proof of concept operation. Fast forward to 2001. The flights had been suspended because of the winter during which they couldn't fly. We then became aware that there was a long-term program in the Air Force to arm the Predator. Johnny Jumper, the head of the Air Force, thought that it might be possible to crash, probably the wrong word, to accelerate this program and arm the Predator right away. General Jumper directed that happen. It happened in a matter of months, not a matter of years, and it appeared to work in tests in the western United States. When on September 4th we held the principals meeting that's been discussed, the issue on the table was, would CIA fly the armed Predator? And CIA took the view in the principals meeting that it was not their job to fly armed UAVs, and they did not want to fly the armed Predator under their authority. I was informed by people who were in the CIA that during the discussions inside CIA, people in the Directorate of Operations had raised objections, saying, for example, that if CIA flies the armed Predator and it kills bin Laden, then CIA agents all around the world will be at risk of retaliation attack by Al-Qaeda. I didn't think that was a very persuasive reason, because I thought CIA agents were already at risk of attack by Al-Qaeda. In any event, as the September 4th principals meeting ended, CIA had not agreed to fly the mission. September 11th happened. CIA then agreed to fly the Armed Predator mission. It went into operation very quickly in Afghanistan. It found the military commander.
Within a month?
I think within a month. It found the military commander of Al-Qaeda, and because it was armed then, it could not only find things, it could kill them. And it launched a missile, a Hellfire missile, at the military commander of Al-Qaeda and killed him and his associates. Hope that answers the question.
That answers the question. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Okay. Mr. Clarke, thank you very much. Thank you not only for your testimony today, but thank you for your extraordinary time you spent already with the Commission and your willingness to help us with our important work.
And there you have it, a break in the action now on Capitol Hill as Richard Clarke has just completed his testimony, was scheduled to go just about 2.5 hours and wrapped up about, I'd say, 20 minutes or so short of that. You may have heard a mention of Fox News in there, and that was, well, let's bring Jeff Birnbaum in from our Washington newsroom. He's a Fox News contributor. Jeff, let's talk a little bit about that part of it, I guess, since we were brought up in the middle of it. Why not?
Well, there was the accusation, at least in here, that Fox revealed that Richard Clarke, who was the counterterrorism czar and was the person who has been last testifying before the 9/11 Commission, that he gave a background briefing to reporters, but we were told that it was, in fact, Clarke who was giving this briefing, defending the president's position on a variety of matters. And there was the accusation by former Democratic Senator Bob Kerrey that Fox should not have disclosed who was giving this briefing. A background briefing is done by someone without attribution. Sitting here in this little studio where I'm sitting, I'm afraid I don't know the facts behind it, and I would have to defer to someone else in the Washington Bureau to answer what Fox exactly did.
Well, it was Jim Angle who had that, and we'll get Jim Angle on in just a little while. For the record, always fair and always balanced.
Always.
But as we move on, how much difference is there between that and Condoleezza Rice? Condoleezza Rice, who, as the National Security Advisor, is charged with giving background briefings to the President of the United States on a daily basis. And it's hard to imagine a world, quite frankly, where someone like that, in a position like that, might have to, every time he or she goes to the president to give a briefing on background, might have to consider whether he or she would end up before a commission such as this one. Would that be a productive way to do things?
No, certainly not. I think that what's in question here is a briefing to the press, not to the president. That is also often done where there are senior level officials who tell the press what's going on or try to explain away some controversy, which was the case here, without giving his or her name to the press. In other words, a senior administration official said, you've seen that so many times. This is an example of that, as I understand it, not a confidential conversation between a senior official and the president.
All right, Jeff, I need to get in a quick commercial break. We're at the White House today, just across the street from the White House with a special edition of Studio B. It's my understanding that Jim Angle will be live with Neil Cavuto in the next hour, also from the White House, to discuss that briefing, as it were, that was brought up by Kerry there in the middle of this hearing. In addition, there is a lot of other news across the country and around the world today. It's good to have you with us on Studio B.
I don't let pain interfere with my life. When I'm working with the kids and my knees hurt, I take genuine Bayer aspirin. Bayer stops the pain. Bayer works great on all kinds of pain. And it can do even more. Genuine Bayer aspirin can help save your life when taken during a heart attack. No other pain reliever can do so much. Not Advil, not Tylenol. I've made Bayer a part of my life, so I can live my life.
Bayer. Take it for pain, take it for life.
drivers feel really good riding with Geico. 15 minutes could save you 15% or more on car insurance.
Honey, it's time.
It's time? Really? Now?
Time to get the new carpet.
When you're ready for new carpet, call Empire today.
Hey, you breathe, I'll call.
Shop at home and choose from a great selection. We install next day. Call right now and save 50%. Plus, no payments for a year.
Now that's an easy delivery.
800-588-2300 Empire. Today, call for next day window treatments, too.
Hi, I'm Sam DeBello, realtor and educator. You know, I was 37 years old when I bought my first house, and then I found out I could have done that a lot sooner, and so can you. I believe that most people who rent can buy, and I'll show you how to do that for free. If you're even thinking about buying a home, we'll teach you everything you need to know about the home buying process. And we don't sell books or tapes or anything like that, so leave your wallet at home. Call 877-I-GOT-SMART, that's 877-I-GOT-SMART, or visit Rotopia.com.
Hey, VHICS.
Right here.
Give me the safety ratings for these vehicles.
Got it.
It's not easy finding car safety information.
Mercedes.
But VHICS.com can find it for you.
It has side airbags, right?
Right down to crash test rankings.
Where's that infinity tape?
Then present it to you.
Ta-da!
Thanks.
Because keeping your family safe is an important job.
And who are you?
Thankless, but important. VHICS.com.
Minutes before the hour now on Studio B, and Fox News Channel's continuing coverage of the hearings, the 9/11 hearings with the commission on Capitol Hill. Let's go to Molly Henneberg, who's our correspondent covering this. She's live in our booth there on the Hill. Molly?
Hi, Shep. Former counterterrorism advisor to both President Bush and President Clinton, Richard Clarke, he just wrapped up his testimony, about 2 hours worth, here on Capitol Hill. And as you were just talking about earlier, he has a book out that really accuses the Bush administration of ignoring the al-Qaeda threat. Clarke testified today that he believes the Bush administration treated the al-Qaeda threat as an important threat, but not necessarily urgent. And so when Clarke came out to testify today, we were wondering if, with this book out and everything, all this publicity, if Clarke would have some sort of dramatic opening statement. Instead, his opening statement was very short, and really it was an apology to the victims of the 9/11 attacks. Here's what Clarke said in his introductory statement.
I can apologize to the loved ones of the victims of 9/11, to them who are here in the room, to those who are watching on television. Your government failed you. Those entrusted with protecting you failed you. And I failed you. We tried hard, but that doesn't matter because we failed.
As for 9/11, CIA Director George Tenet also testified today. He talked about a spike in intelligence threat reporting in the summer of '01. He says the CIA reacted and thwarted some attacks, but did not penetrate al-Qaeda far enough to uncover the 9/11 plot. Richard Clarke said later that he was very concerned that something big was going to happen because of all this intelligence reporting in summer '01. He said the CIA believed that it would happen overseas, but Clarke himself was not convinced. Here's what he said.
I thought, however, that it might well take place in the United States based on what we had learned in December '99 when we rolled up operations in Washington State, in Brooklyn, in Boston. The fact that we didn't have intelligence that we could point to that said it would take place in the United States wasn't significant in my view because, frankly, sir, I know how this is going to sound, but I have to say it, I didn't think the FBI would know.
Taking on the FBI there. Right now, here on Capitol Hill, Deputy Secretary of State Richard Armitage is testifying. That will wrap up 2 days of these hearings. The final report by the 9/11 Commission is due out this summer. Shep?
Molly Henneberg live on Capitol Hill. Neil Cavuto, of course, coming up in just a moment with much more on the Armitage testimony and all the rest. But first, I want to go back to the White House behind me. Wendell Goler on the North Lawn now. Wendell?
Hello, Shepard. The hot news here, an audio tape that my colleague Jim Angle came up with of a briefing that Clarke gave reporters in August of 2002, the White House saying it contains a point-by-point rebuttal of Clarke's assertions that the president neglected the war on terror because of his obsession with Saddam Hussein. In this tape, Clarke is heard telling reporters that Mr. Bush decided to go after Osama bin Laden less than a month after he took office, contradicting Clarke's claim that the president did virtually nothing in the war on terror early on.
First week in February, decided in principle in the spring to add to the existing Clinton strategy and to increase CIA resources, for example, for covert action, fivefold to go after al-Qaeda.
Clarke was briefing reporters at the time as a senior administration official, but the White House agreed today to put the comments on the record. At the time of the briefing, Clarke was pushing to become the deputy director for the Department of Homeland Security. He warmly praised the Bush administration. He left the administration shortly after when he didn't get the job. Press Secretary Scott McClellan says the comments do more than raise questions about Clarke's credibility. He says they show his assertions, Shepard, were flat out wrong.
Wendell Goler, live for us at the White House. Wendell, thanks very much. And that's a wrap on Studio B for a Wednesday afternoon. I'm Shepard Smith in Washington. Good to have you with us today, but don't go anywhere. Two big exclusives coming up next on Your World with Neil Cavuto. The Treasury Secretary John Snow will be on to talk to Neil about the economy, certainly information about the bomb that was planted, at least, and diffused outside of Paris today. And in addition, Nancy Pelosi will be here. Nancy to talk to Neil about Richard Clarke and the hearings which took place today. This is Fox News Channel, your home for news, fair and balanced. Your World with Neil Cavuto coming up next. Thanks for being with us.